Data log of Terran Contact 2667, Chief General Torlak. What news do you bring, Torlak? Callum spoke, eager to the tales from the battlefield. Have you gained any further insight into the issues we are facing? Polis will need to make ready a new speech for the people of Sela. Reka, Breka, Callum, and Polis sat at their respective sets beside the chief councilman, Callum. They all awaited his report. Prepared for this, Torlak called in Creo, his chief scientist, to speak on part of his behalf. Torlak began, "I must apologize, but spirits are low among the troops." He gauged their reactions, curiosity. "But I am afraid we have been routed from Draxus." "Draxus!"
Polis was the first to respond. "Yes, it is what the so-called Terrans call the system," he continued. "We first treaded into the territory that had yet to be named, save for the two life-bearing planets, Demira and Anmira. They called the system Dema, and it was the first system of our conquest." Callum raised a hand. "What do you mean by Terrans? Is that what we're to call them?" "That is so. In a final raid, scouts informed me of a likely point of interest that quite possibly held information on the enemy." Their posture changed, prompting Torlak to continue, to which he responded by directing their attention to Creo, and their eyes shifted. Creo was uneasy about the stairs, but carried on. He coughed, and a hologram presented itself. Using the latest in data retrieval tech, we were able to seamlessly connect to the enemy's storage farm. They emitted a signal that meant they were passing data wirelessly, so we took that and began downloading the data. I must say, their security is what we would have had some 1,000 years ago, so it was easy for ground technicians to crack, Creo stated proudly. Out of the data we mined are what seem to be classified coordinates, new and upcoming technology. Here, let me show you. They were kind enough to have visuals attached. Pardon the coloring. I do believe some of the data was corrupted and color was lost. The first up seems to be a primitive form of an armored vehicle. Creo explained. He noted that compared to their own armored division, the Terrans were still stuck to technology before levitation tech, and greatly noted the treads the vehicle was supported on. Creo was also keen to mention the overall shape of the main compartment and the gun. The vehicle is moved by treads, no doubt to overcome uneasy terrain. The cabin is rounded with some parts angled to no doubt deflect incoming rounds. From what I have seen, the enemy has yet to field a heavy armored division. The only form we've seen are lightly armored four-wheeled vehicles with poorly welded guns on the rear. Reka raised his hand. "What is that armored abomination called? I'm sure that just from the looks of it, it would be incinerated by a single round from our Halen tank." "I'm sure it would. Their specifications are less than the width of my data pad," Creo said condescendingly. "What do they call it?" Reka asked. "They called it the M4 Sherman. This brings us to another technology they seem to be developing." He changed the photo to one of an aerial element. "This is what they call the F4 Phantom II, a vehicle designed for aerial bombing raids and interceptions." The visual had the council intrigued. By the frame, it suggests that it would be superb in atmospheric conditions. I would definitely be something worth looking out for in the field for our pilots. Creo ended his presentation and stepped back behind Torlak, who remained silent this time. "You have been awfully quiet, Torlak. Is there any additional information on the Terrans and their tactics?" Callum asked. "Yes, actually." Torlak paused. "The Terrans. They employ frightening tactics in combat. I have seen so firsthand." He presented a video format of his latest engagement, and probably his most traumatizing. The councilman watched in horror as a ship from the enemy placed itself beside a Selian frigate and proceeded to fire an overdose of cannon fire into its side. The Selian ship fell to the earth and pieces covered in flame and smoke. The councilman's expressions grew fearful. Torlak played other instances of the slaughter before being told to pause or change it. "As you can see, none of our ships were prepared to engage in such a fight. Their shields were destroyed on encounter and were laid to waste," he said solemnly. The War Council murmured between each other, but Torlak continued. What is even worse is how their infantry throws themselves into combat. He played another video when he fled. They enter metal coffins in the shape of tears and rain them down onto the battlefield. I suspect it was this force that brought Brallo to his end. That name rang bells in the councilmen. Commander Brallo, a warrior who engaged in ground combat with legions of soldiers and was victorious more often than not.
I received those from the last ship to leave the combat zone. It was a video of Brallo. Around him, several soldiers were shot by a slowly advancing force and bringing him to a corner. They thought that he was going to be captured as a prisoner when 2 soldiers came running with a stretcher after he was shot by a lone soldier with a gold mark on his shoulder. However, that was not the case, and the soldier who had already incapacitated him fired one into his skull. Then the video faded to static. The council was uneasy, and their expressions reflected what they felt. "Do not worry, Father," Pola spoke. "I can use what we've learned to further demonize the enemy." "I agree with Polas," spoke Brekka. "We need to keep all information about the Terrans under restriction. We would not want to incite panic."
"We are already too far into this campaign to give up now," Rekka concurred. "I would not subject my troops to such suicidal tactics. That makes us better than these savages. The sooner we rid them of our future colonies, the better will be if the Union attacks." "The populace has yet to know about the Terran slaves we are currently trading to the Union. It is best if we keep it as such," Gallam added. The 4 continued providing more ways to keep themselves as righteous to the people in the face of the enemy. The last speech by Polas had already prompted large-scale recruitment efforts into their forces, as well as workers for asset manufacturing. Business was booming, as they say. Torlak thought to himself of the current economic boom his people were experiencing. "Is there anything more of me or my scientist?" Torlak beckoned. "That will be all," Kalim responded. Creo and Torlak left the War Council chambers and found themselves in the courtyard just outside. The sun was still high, and the sky was filled with brilliant blue and the whitest of clouds. A slight breeze caressed their bodies, and both shivered. "Soon shall be the season of ice," commented Creo, to which Torlak agreed. They walked to the entrance of the building and were greeted by 2 guards who let them pass. Then they found themselves on a walkway littered with pedestrians. Children with their parents swung between their arms, and smiles were flagrantly expressed, warming Torlak. "This is why I do what I do, Torlak, for all these people and more. What about you?" Creo asked. Torlak took some time to answer and did so after a pause. "Not to say that I don't, but I feel that we could have gone in an entirely different direction. The council did not have to resort to violence." The 2 continued down the road toward a bakery that Creo suggested they try. The roads were mainly for pedestrians, and any private vehicles flew overhead in designated zones away from populated areas or by rail. "I know how you feel, but compared to the Terrans," Creo took care to whisper their name, "I would pick us over them any day, wouldn't you?" "Of course. As I said, if we wish to be able to take up arms against the Union, I think it would be best to get them on our side." Creo's eyes grew. "After what we did? Are you crazy? What do you think they would do to us if they found out what we did with their people? No thanks. I say we press on in our campaign and call it a day. Besides, at the rate we're going, we'll have the ships to outnumber them 10 to 1. Torlak agreed, but silently rejected the notion of extermination. Even after this time, it still didn't sit right with him and actively sought ways to peaceably approach, but constantly put that notion on the back burner. They have finally made their way to the bakery Creo was so eager to try and was glad upon its shorter than usual line. When it was his turn, he ordered a Valrin bun and roll while Torlak settled for the Trill spice bread. They found themselves at an outdoor table as they consumed their food. "I'm telling you, nothing beats the Valrin bun and roll combo," Creo said with vigor as Torlak took a bite out of his Trill spice bread. "Glad you enjoy it, because it came out of my pocket." Torlak snared. "Don't worry, I'll transfer what I owe tonight." Torlak nodded pleasantly and finished his meal. He bid farewell to Creo, who continued eating while browsing on his datapad. Torlak wandered around for the rest of the day, visiting shops and browsing gifts, before settling on a fine necklace and head ornament band in the design of graciously decorated flowers. It was a popular type of headwear for the opposite sex, and the particular one he bought just so happened to match with the necklace. Both were placed in a neat but expensive-looking back, and Torlak left the high-end jewelry shop toward the main rail. From the central area of Artre, the capital city, his trip would take him to just outside the main city limits. The ride was a total of 1 hour and 20 minutes, and he saw the gradual recession of the city into sparse buildings and land as far as the eye can see. Grass up to his waist spread out into the land, and the landscape was decorated with patches of large trees that offered a wealth of shade from the sun, and kids could be seen playing under some of them. Torlak continued to peer out the window and look towards the horizon. While his immediate horizon was obscured by grass-laden hills, he was still able to see a large and imposing range of mountains that were all kinds of shades of gray tipped with white snow. His home was relatively close to the mountains, and when he was younger, they would take trips up and play in the snow during the height of the season. As he reminisced, his ride came to a smooth halt, and the doors opened. His cabin was mostly free of riders, and was mostly old folk who had likely retired to the country. When he stepped off, he looked in the direction of where he came from and saw the outline of tall buildings in the far distance. Glimmers of light sparkled here and there in the sky surrounding the buildings, a mix of personal and commercial shuttles. He continued off the platform, and the doors to the rail closed with a muffled hiss and continued on its journey. When it was gone, only silence was present. The sounds of birds broke that silence with a harmonious tune. He continued, and from the platform was met with a small town that had homes placed about on the hills, and trees covered the main walkway with shade. It was quaint and quiet, with little foot traffic now that the sun was beginning to set. After walking for several minutes, he faced the door to a small home, the lights now illuminating parts of the walkway to the house. The laughter of children could be heard as he approached closer, and when he knocked on the door, the noises stopped and a muffled whisper took their place. After a moment, the door opened, and he was met with a woman. Her eyes were large, and her skin was a smooth violet with amethyst markings that dotted her face in a smooth and tribal pattern. "Tor!" she yelled and embraced him, her arms around his neck and her head into his chest. The door widened, and 2 children came out. Both shared aspects of the woman and his burgundy shade. They gripped him at the sides. "Dad!" He did his best to embrace them all, but found that task impossible. "Yes, children, Daddy's home," he replied. He settled the children down, and the family found themselves in the living room, the kids attached to him. "I hadn't expected you so soon. I hadn't received a message for so long that I began to fear the worst," the woman said, pouring a warm liquid and handing it to Tor. "I apologize for that, Aleska. My work dictated I keep messages to a minimum," he said, applying a shallow smile. "Oh, before I forget, I got this for you." He handed her the necklace and ornamental head ornament, and she adorned them both, gaining the attention of the kids and her husband. "It looks beautiful. What made you decide to buy something like this?" she asked. "As general, I think it's only fitting for my wife." She blushed, giving him a kiss paired with the oohs and ahs of their children. "Don't worry, I didn't forget you both," he said, grabbing 2 items from his coat. "For my dear Elisa," and gave her a doll of a character from her favored children's show, "and for my strong son, Torlin." He brought out a small toy in the shape of a Celian frigate adorned in paint celebrating the Union secession. Both children glowed with their gifts and began playing with Aleska and Tor on the couch, watching their children play without a care in the world. "How long will you be here?" Aleska asked with a pleading look. "I don't know. We've been granted some time away and rotated out so another group can take our place. I'm just glad you're finally back home. The kids have missed you." He observed the 2. Elisa used her doll like a large attacking monster, and Torlin fought back with his ship. They continued fighting it out, but eventually came around to the 2 toys joining forces against an invisible enemy. "Who are they fighting?" he asked. "The Tewins," Torlin said.
Torlak grew uneasy and faced Aleska. "Where'd he learn that from?" he said with a wry smile. "It's been all over the news. Councilman Polis gave out a speech not long before you came home. What this about the Terrans?" Tor swallowed, unsure how to answer. "They're the bad guys." Tor conceded, contrary to his growing feelings about the recent actions against them. "I just so happened to come back from a battle with them." Her eyes grew wide. "Did you win?" "It was close," he lied. "They're tough, but we drove them back," he said, feigning strength. He reassured her, and she subsequently relaxed, stress still somewhat present. The children continued playing until it was time for bed. Tor and Aleska tucked them both into bed and retired to their room. Exhaustion took him and Aleska equally, and the two drifted off to sleep. Their world stopped, even if for a bit. Tor didn't care. All he cared for currently was his family, and he would take the days as they came.
Celionet, Verbis server, new forum, hot. Title, look what I came across, 700 million views. Trillin boss, look what I came across, see attachment. I think the council's hiding something. Celia hunk, what the hells is it? I ain't finding anything in my logs about it. Not on the Verbis servers either. Laszlo Orbit, those aren't from the Union. What are the council doing? Dim Quasar, check this, play video. I've never seen a shuttle just fall out the sky like that. Their engines just blew up. Bright Sun, Lasso worker here. One of our coolant drives self-destructed. This is the first ever case and we've had this tech for 1,000 years. Celia hunk, that's crazy. I think something's going on outside, so let me check. Laszlo Orbit, ya hunk be safe. Hearing reports of shuttles going haywire. Trillin boss, check out this other stuff too. See attachment. Councilman Polis said something about the menace of Terrans, but some documents got leaked about running them across the Union border. Are we the bad guys? Bright Sun, man, they shut down a quarter of the station from another incident. Apparently a heavy service drone went on a rampage, killed like 4 people before security got it. See attachment. Ran them down like paper. What going on? Dim Quasar. I can't get a hold of my friends in Verbis. Anyone hear about that? Connection lost.